I think we're all becoming very, very aware of the danger that excessive social use poses to all sorts of people, all sorts of age groups who might indulge in or be captive to excessive social media use. And we are slowly starting to see the results of research that look into this aspect. And there is new research from the University of the Western Cape, which suggests strongly that there is a psychological cost to constant connectivity. We're joined now by the Dean of the Faculty of Community and Health Sciences at the university, Professor Anita Padmanabhanuni. Anita, a very, very good afternoon. Thank you for your time.
Good afternoon. Thank you so much for having me on your show.
The research, what did you do? What did you look at and what did you find?
Our study focused on social media integration and its association with student mental health. Social media integration refers to the extent to which social media is central to or embedded in a person's daily routines, in their relationships, and in their emotional life. And what we found is that the more social media is central to a person's life, in this case students, the increased likelihood of their experiencing anxiety, depression, and post-traumatic stress disorder. And to explain the link with depression and anxiety, we suggested that social media often presents very highly curated or highly edited versions of people's lives, of their appearance, of their achievements, and their lifestyles. And when students compare themselves to these idealized images, these almost perfect images, they may feel that they are falling short in some way, or that these are areas that they may not be able to achieve, and this can potentially lead to questioning their own worth and value and can contribute to feelings of anxiety and depression.
I listened to that, and there are a couple of questions that come immediately to mind. Is it very individualized that what is acceptable and doesn't lead to any of these negative psychosocial consequences for one person is too much for another person? So how does one establish what is too connected? And then how severe, and again I presume it's individualized, how severe are the consequences of too much connectivity?
I think using social media or accessing social media is not an inherently bad thing. Social media, our study focused on students, so social media can promote a sense of peer support, it can contribute to a sense of connection, community, and belonging. So it's not inherently bad. The problem arises when social media use becomes automatic rather than intentional, and when it starts to interfere with other important aspects of your life, such as your academic work or your work-related responsibilities or your relationships. And it can differ from individual to individual.
So there's no clear line of advice that you can give. Don't spend more than 10 minutes an hour. Don't spend more than 2 hours a day. It is that individualized that everybody will have a breaking point.
I don't think it's necessarily about how much time you spend on social media. Of course, if you're spending hours and hours, it is going to interfere with your life in general. But it is more about what is the purpose of using social media and how does it make you feel after you've engaged with social media content. Does it make you feel supported? Does it make you feel encouraged? Or does it make you feel despondent, or does it negatively impact on your mood? And this can differ from one person to the next. So it's not necessarily about the amount of time you spend on social media, but it's the impact that the time you spend has on you.
And again, that's variable, because there's sometimes I can look at some things and be unaffected by them, and there are other times when I look at those things and I'm severely affected by them. So I wonder in the study whether you found certain kinds of social media more likely to cause these feelings of anxiety than other kinds.
So we didn't focus on specific types of social media. So we didn't differentiate between, let's say, Instagram and TikTok or Facebook. We looked at social media broadly. But one of the interesting findings that came out of the study that we did not anticipate was the association with post-traumatic stress disorder. And that's not to say that social media causes PTSD. Instead, PTSD is caused by experiencing deeply traumatic events. But we hypothesize that for students who have experienced a traumatic event and they use social media, they may be more likely to be exposed to images or content that reminds them of the traumatic event, and that in turn may aggravate PTSD. We also hypothesize that it's possible for students with PTSD to use social media as a form of distraction from the difficult memories of the trauma and to cope with some of those emotions.
Yeah, and I would imagine that the student population at UWC will have a fairly high proportion of people who would have been in circumstances which might lead to post-traumatic stress disorder.
I don't believe it's distinctive to UWC. What the South African research across the board has shown is that the student population, much like the population of South Africa, has been exposed to extremely traumatic events and are vulnerable to developing PTSD. So it's not distinctive to the University of the Western Cape, but South African research has shown that it is a problem across the board.
So how does one what does one do with this information? How do you draw up a communication campaign to the students to say these are the things to look out for at this point? Stop and ask yourself whether you should be continuing to look at X, Y, and Z, or you just sort of drop it into the academic world and say, there it is. Read it if you want.
So I think that at every university there's orientation programs, and part of those orientation programs can be a focus on digital health, and that can form part of the broader focus on student mental health and well-being. And part of those programs can involve promoting awareness about social media use, about the point at which social media use can become harmful, and also about strategies that students can use to regulate their use. So, for example, having periods during the day that are phone-free, such as when they are studying or attending class, or when they're engaging with their family or their friends, and also, for example, turning off non-essential notifications so that they're not constantly cued to access social media. So it isn't about prohibiting students from using social media, because that's an impossibility, but it's about promoting awareness so that use can be more intentional and more beneficial to the student.
Thank you very much, Professor Anita Padmanabhanuni, who is the Dean of the Faculty of Commerce and Health Sciences at the University of the Western Cape.